Welcome to Fox Encounter. I am your host, Fox. Please consider taking a few seconds to subscribe, drop a like on the video, and share it with your friends. Stay tuned for more content and enjoy the episode.
And now, suspense.
All right, well, I'll start. So, the more I think about Rebel Moon Part 2, the more, I kind of dislike it.
Mm-hmm.
The more because I rewatched it again. I couldn't finish it the second time. I got an hour and a half in and to the final battle. Then I'm like, okay, I remember this. And I feel like, I don't know, just the more I watch it, the more I'm kind of I think I was just too nice on it. It didn't sit with me long enough. I watched it. I'm like, that was all right. I mean, it didn't feel as satisfying as I wanted to feel. It didn't expand on anything introduced in the first one. Only two characters got they got better. After that, it just kind of ended. It just felt hollow. You're kind of yeah, it happened. And we talked about this too, where it literally has that problem where part one was nothing but setup, and then part two is the second to third act of the previous movie, where it should have been, just stretched out to be 2 hours. When you're kind of this could have been the last hour of the last movie if they would have just structured it a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of what it feels like, and it sucks to say that because how big of a fan I am of Snyder. It just sucks to say. How about you? How you feeling thinking about it now?
So I'm gonna start with we can start with part one. Well, part two is more fresh in my mind.
Yeah.
But we'll kind of go run back to part one and stuff and kind of discuss a bit of that. This
Okay.
will be, for those watching, this will be a spoiler discussion. If you haven't seen Rebel Moon Part 1 and 2, it's out. So what are you doing? Go watch it.
Exactly.
So I have the same kind of feeling. Obviously, with the way that Part 2 ends, there's more. There's more to the overall story and everything. So yeah, watching it, I'm like, okay, that's it. All right, I guess there's more. We talked about the runtime, and the entire time I was thinking this needs to pick up because it feels like it's just going still.
Mm-hmm.
And me thinking that, okay, we should get some kind of conclusion within the next 10 minutes. But then it turns out that the last 45, 50 minutes of the movie is the battle scene. Yeah, so when it does end, I'm like, oh, okay, so there's more. So it did feel very it did, for me, it did feel like it dragged on a bit, and it did feel kind of lackluster, like you were saying in your video and stuff. For those that haven't watched your Texas videos, go watch those. I'll probably link those in the description.
Thank you. Honestly, looking back at my video, I was too nice on it. Because I made that video, so I did it immediately because I was off work that night because it dropped on Friday. I was off work this weekend. So I literally I watched it, did a rough draft of the script, and I just kind of sat on it for a couple hours. Next thing I know, it's 4 a.m. I'm I'm still awake. I'll make this video real quick. Made the video, kind of sat on it again until 9, 10 o'clock. I'm I'm gonna go to bed. So I'll publish it. I put it out there. Then I woke up, rewatched my own video. I'm kind of I went too easy. I feel like I let too much slide by me. It's sort of thing. The more I process, it's because I don't want to dislike it as much as I do, which is unfortunate. That's what's some I like part one more. I think part one was better. Part two had the way better action sequences, when the Admiral and Korra actually fight when they're falling down. That shit was really cool. So it's the action sequences I think are way better, and I think it has the better visuals. I think it's all that stuff is better. But it's just the story and the world and the characters was surprisingly better in the first one.
Yeah, that's kind of what I had mentioned, that I feel like the visuals and especially the special effects looked a lot cleaner in the second one. So that I really dug that. I really thought that it looked a lot better. In the first one, there are some parts where the CGI wasn't that great. It looked a little cartoony, a little video game-esque,
Yeah.
But it didn't bother me. We've discussed this a few times that bad special effects in movies don't bother me whatsoever, because I'm just so used to special effects in majority of movies just being really bad that I don't even notice it anymore. People will be like, oh, was it I'm more of a story guy anyway. So visual effects just don't bug me. If the visual effects are part of the storytelling, say, I think Avatar or something like that, where the special effects really are the basis of the story in general, because it's a super basic story anyway, then that's when I'll be like, yeah, this sucks and it looks terrible. But in other movies, especially like sci-fi and all that stuff. I don't think it bugs me very much, but I do think that the visuals look a lot better, and like the camera work all the shots and stuff do look a lot better in part two.
I was gonna say too, if you went on Netflix, is that they actually have a making of section that released after they finished part two because it has footage from part two in it. And I'm watching it, and like I love hearing Snyder and his friends talk about the movie. Like you hear him talk about the movie and explain, you're kind of like, that sounds really awesome. But then you watch the movie, you're kind of like, I see the idea, but I don't think it's not all there. We still haven't seen the director's cut, so I know the director's cut of part one is going to be way better. But I don't know what they're going to do for part two because really thinking about it, it was already stretched. Like the story was pretty stretched then already, you know? Because it was just very simple, kind of like train them up. Now we fight for 50 minutes. So it's kind of
Mhm.
like, where are you going to put an extra like 30 to 45 minutes in that? I'm assuming the first half, but it's like, then I think it might drag because it kind of dragged anyway because you're kind of just waiting for the good stuff to happen. So I'm curious where the more footage is going to be. I do like think, and it's like I don't. When people said this, I always kind of ignored it. They said basically Snyder needs a better writer. If he has a really strong script, he makes great movies. And I always thought, I don't really think that's completely true because he obviously co-writes a lot of his movies. He puts a lot of ideas in more movies. He gets some story credits too for some of his movies and other ones that he didn't direct, like Wonder Woman. But then after actually seeing him work with like two writers who their only writing credit are Army of the Dead and these two movies, I kind of see what they're talking about. Like David S. Goyer is a really good writer for Man of Steel and BVS, which
Mhm.
makes sense why his movies are so great because he's a really good writer and Snyder was a great choice to interpret that stuff and put his own ideas in it. So I'm kind of seeing what they mean now. If you give Snyder like full control, he's going to go all out, and I don't think no one's going to really. They're not going to translate either that well or kind of like tell them, okay, we can pull back on this to focus on that, or we can do it this
Mhm.
way instead. You know, I feel like after the hype of the Snyder cut, Netflix just wanted him and decided to let him just go crazy. You know, it's good because he gets so much creative freedom. It's also bad because no one's stopping him, and he has
Yeah.
writers who aren't as good as his like 300 had a really good writer, Man of Steel, BBS, Watchmen, really strong group of writers to do it. You know, Rebel Moon, it didn't have that, or it didn't have people stopping him either. So that's why it kind of felt like him just going crazy. Same thing
Mhm.
with Army of Dead. Same deal where it's like he just went all out with all a bunch of different ideas instead of like funneling down to like maybe two or three really good ones.
Yeah.
Army of Dead has a lot of shit going on if you actually look at all like the different things in it. There's the aliens theory, there's the time travel. It could be in there. That could be in there. It's like, well, which one is it? Pick two or three really good ones and we'll go with that.
He went full Snyder on this one, which is like I said, like us being fans of it. I think we can say that we do appreciate it, but we also can say those things and be like, yeah, it's not that great, but
it's
it's
it's him. It's
him.
I
Yeah.
think, like I said, I think he's a really good idea guy. Like now I'm starting to understand. Like he's a really good idea guy, and when he's obviously very involved in the writing, he's very involved in like every process of it because he draws and storyboards most of it
Hmm.
before they even get the production rolling. So he just needs stronger groups of writers around him to help translate what he wants to say.
Sure it will be, but hopefully, like he'll look at this project and think, maybe I should have reeled some of this in, or maybe I should have had people telling me no instead of just having a bunch of yes guys around, or just having when you have full creative control, you are your biggest enemy because there's no
Mhm.
one around you who's gonna say, hey, maybe that's not a good idea, or hey, maybe we could do this differently.
Yeah, that makes sense. Nolan does the same thing in his recent years, like with Tenet and Oppenheimer. There's a lot of things in those movies you're kind of like, I see what you're going for, but like you could pull it back here and pull it back there. It's one of those
Hmm.
things where it's like it has its best aspects, but also has its worst aspects. It's like that, you know.
Like Nolan needs to fire his sound engineer. That's what he needs to
Apparently that's intentional. I've
do.
seen videos of people breaking down saying it's supposed to like be muffled with like the talking audio. I'm like,
I don't buy that.
I don't either. I don't know. It just sounds like horrible mixing or something. I don't know what it is. Tenet was so hard to understand.
Yeah, but like yeah, and I think that's where I think a lot of directors. I mean, you could say that about like really any director, like any big director that has just so much clout and just so much like creative control over everything. There are some like we can say that about Martin Scorsese. Like there are
Oh yeah,
things in The Irishman that I was like, why didn't anybody tell him not to do this?
or James Cameron.
Or James Cameron, somebody should have said, hey, maybe not do that. But
You don't need to make 5 Avatar movies or 12 or
yeah,
what it's supposed to be.
I feel like Zack Snyder is not so pompous and egotistical that he can, take a step back and be like, huh, what did I learn from this? I respect Rebel Moon for what it is because it's him being able to just have full creative control without the studios breathing down his neck, which is what he's had to deal with pretty much every single film of his career.
Yeah.
And he mentions that a lot. Watching a lot of interviews that he's done recently and stuff, he mentions it, or even old ones too. He mentions that the fact that he's never really had the opportunity to do a movie where there wasn't a studio just breathing down his neck every single hour of every single day.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe he can look at this and just be like, all right, cool, I did that, and let me now have maybe just need to get it out of your system that one time and just go bat shit crazy and do whatever you want. All right, now it's time to be a company man and do what I got to do.
Yeah, basically, I think he needs to like move on to a new project because he did Army of the Dead. They only did like what one spinoff, and then he started focusing on Rebel Moon. I saw in an interview recently he wants to do 6 Rebel Moon movies. He wants to do like a whole saga, and it's like slow down. We can, like you said, it's just I think he needs to take like maybe like a year off to like actually reflect, get a new team of people to see what they can do, and hell, maybe use some of the same cast members. I would like to see Ray Fisher in another movie because that guy has not been getting work ever since Justice League and the whole Joss
Mm-hmm.
Whedon thing. So I would like to see Snyder take on a different task before returning back to like Rebel Moon to do something, do a continuation of that. I
Yeah.
think he's had, like you said, he has so much control that, and for most of his career he didn't. I think he just went all out. So that's what this is. Like we can respect it. It's like okay, cool, you're doing your thing. I like it. It's cool, but like at the end of the day, it's still a product we have to consume. And the nicest thing we can say about it is Snyder's having fun. Remember, Moon Part One was definitely better because it introduced so much that seemed way more interesting. And then Part Two was just here's the climax of here's what you thought the climax of the last movie was gonna be, but instead of being the last hour, it's gonna be the last 2 hours, and
Mm-hmm.
you're like, okay. And it just didn't feel like I said, it just felt very hollow, lackluster, and just like you're watching, just waiting for things to happen. You're like, okay, we're farming, now we're training, now we're making a plan. Okay, now we have some pretty cool action, and now it's over. That's just basically how the movie feels. It just kind of
Mm-hmm.
steamrolls through everything. Then it has that one section I was thinking about. The more I think about this section, the more I don't like it. It's the part where General Titus and all the warriors and Korra are all sitting down at the table, right? It's the night before the big battle. And they all take turns telling their backstory a little bit. And I was just thinking, this felt like it should have been introduced in the first part of the movie. Like
Mm-hmm.
part one should have had these scenes, not now. It
Mm-hmm.
felt weird.
Yeah, maybe like at the end of the first one or somewhere like in the middle, kind of like do backstories. Because I'm all for like flashbacks and backstories of characters. When it comes to movies like this, where they have like ragtag group of people that they come together, I like
Mhm.
the recruiting side of a lot of those stories and like backstories of those people. Let's circle back to like part one or whatever when they're starting to recruit all the people
Mhm.
like that. Those are my favorite parts of those kinds of movies is the recruiting, and I think all the
Mhm.
characters are interesting. They all have really cool and interesting backstories. We don't get a whole lot of it. We kind of get like little snippets of it in the first one, where people just telling the audience like, and with that kind of that in that way they just say like, oh, this person is this and they're kind of known for this. And then it
Mhm.
isn't until part two that we get a visual like flashback of these people's like backstories. I did like that part. I thought that part was pretty cool, but it did feel a bit out of place just because I'm like, you've kind of known each other for a little while now, and you're just barely starting to. But we don't know how much time is in between them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like between the time of them, like with the admiral and everything, and then now we're back on the planet and building the game plan. Like we don't know how much time that was.
It's so weird because I know the all of Rebel Moon Part Two takes place in 5 days because they do the farming shit technically in three, and
Mm-hmm.
then they do the training in two, So I guess that, or maybe just one technically. And then they do the final battle. That's like, I guess, the fifth day or the morning of the sixth day or something like that.
Yeah, when the guy said he was going to be there in 5 days.
Yeah, so we got that. But I know what you mean. In the previous movie, I even pointed this out because the way it's so choppy when they with the recruiting scenes, how fast they go through everybody. Even though it's 2 hours, a little over 2 hours long, I can't tell you how much time actually passed in part one because I'm kind of like, that's why I feel like there's so much in between those like travel sections. I feel like there's way more scenes of them actually interacting before they get somewhere else. Because to me, it felt like the part one felt like it only took place in like 2 days, maybe three. Because there's like one scene where they sleep when they're traveling to the bar where they first meet Charlie Hunnam's character. So I know it at least took a day to get there, and then from there they just pick up so many people within like 45, 50 minutes. I'm kind of like, has it been like 2 days? How long y'all been traveling together? Because this is really fast. Which I
Yeah.
know when they have the director's cut, it's definitely gonna fill in a lot of that. But for
Mhm.
part two, I know what you mean. It just feels weird. You're kind of like, you guys should have already known a little bit more about each other than just what you know now. But we don't know how long it's been because, there's just no, it doesn't really go over the passes of time in that very well.
I think what I like the most about part one is the introduction of the characters, the whole world building. I feel like it spent the whole. I feel like part two suffers from part two of any kind of movie
Yeah.
thing. Is that like part ones are usually always my favorite. Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring is my favorite of the three
Mm,
because two and three just feel like a giant battle to me. They're fantastic movies, but the first one has all of the emotion and all of the backstory and all of these characters and getting to know them. And so I really enjoy the first one more than any of the other ones. Same with like the Godfather trilogy. I enjoy the first one more than any
hmm
of the other ones, even though I think they're all fantastic. But we see with like Rebel Moon, we get introduced to Cora, and she's obviously a new member to this community. They're all a bunch of like farmers who live peacefully. That's all they do is just farm for the mother world. And then the mother world is doing their whole thing, taking over
mm,
planets and taking over different people. They get to the planet and they say, "Hey, we need a bunch of your supplies to feed our army." That sounds like a pretty good setup, right? Like
hmm
just a farming village or farming planet that is just at the whim of the bigger planet who shows up and is like, "Hey, okay, well, yeah, we're on our, missions, just kind of rampaging through the universe and we need supplies, so we're taking it from you." And obviously, they're just like, "Well, that means we're not going to have anything for ourselves." Big planet is like, "We don't give a fuck. Just give us
yeah.
give us your stuff." You ever see The Patriot with Mel Gibson?
Yeah.
In a way, and I found that very interesting, those parts, because it felt like a historical drama in a way, but it's set in space where, back in the day, like back in like the Revolutionary War or whatever, soldiers were just setting up in people's houses. They would just like come through and be like,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay, hey, you have a pretty nice farm. Yeah, we're gonna set up here and you really can't do anything about it."
Nice place, nigga.
So that's kind of how that felt in Rebel Moon Part One, that I found very, very interesting. Because I'm like, whoa, this is like crazy. Like even far into the future or like far into a different universe, like the same shit is kind of happening. Obviously, it's not going to go well because those kind of things never go well. The bigger
hmm
planet's always going to want to step on the small farmers because they think they're just worthless.
Right.
So, Korra helps defend them, kill some soldiers, and that's not going to go well. And obviously, her being the most wanted criminal in the universe, but we don't know why until part
hmm
two, which is also pretty interesting. It's definitely inspired by like Seven Samurai, which is also like Magnificent Seven, stuff like that.
hmm
Basically, just, this lower community trying to recruit warriors or gunslingers or whatever to help defend themselves. Which is
Right.
it's a great premise. You know what I mean? Like it's so simple. It's been done 1,000 times, but it's just it's such a good story plot that it always works for the most part. And when they go and recruit all these new characters, when they're showing all of these different planets and places that these people are from, and you get to see all of the different like creatures and robots and stuff like that, that stuff I really enjoyed. The issue with part two is once all of that is done and we're back onto like the farm planet, does feel very kind of like bland because you just got done with 2 hours of just seeing like space and all these different creatures and all these different people. And then you go back to these like farmers, and I did enjoy aspects of it because I'm a big fan of Westerns. So it did feel like a sci fi Western in that sense. But like I said, going from part one and just seeing all this cool like science fiction to going to part two and spending 2 hours of that on a farm planet, I was like, okay, it kind of like drains a lot of that life out of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's probably it's also probably another reason why it felt so like it dragged on. Just because you're like it's the same location, you're just kind of the same spot. Then you have the big battle, and then you only ever see the inside of a bigger ship or the farm planet you've already seen for an hour at that point. So it
Mhm.
just it just feels so boring. Then also I feel like I don't know how to describe this. It's like it didn't feel as like epic as I wanted it to. Like the conclusion of blowing it up and everything like that. It felt kind of smaller scale because it is constricted to like just a little farm planet. It just feels so lackluster. I can't think of another word. It's just lackluster. Now I don't think it's terrible. Like I see people say it's like it's his worst movie. I would still probably watch it over Army of the Dead because I think Army of the Dead is probably his weakest one because I don't think Army of the Dead is as interesting as Rebel Moon. But I do think these last three movies, Army of the Dead and Rebel Moon, possibly might be some of his weakest in general. You know,
Mhm.
like bottom 4 or 5 maybe. They have interesting ideas, but it's the idea we went back to. It's just he had so much creative freedom. He didn't know what he wanted to do, so he just did all of it. That's what it felt like.
Mhm.
And instead of having just a few just great ideas with a good team of writers. I think the only movie he actually wrote like fully was Sucker Punch, I think. Which same movie. That movie has so many good ideas, but it's just the execution where like if it was in the hands of someone who was a better writer, it could work, you know?
Mhm.
It's a Snyder, fantastic idea guy. I mean, like I can see that. It's just like he just needs better writers.
Better collaborators.
Yes, better collaborators. Because
Mhm.
like then also you go from working with like David S. Goyer to like anyone else, it's already going to be hard to top because you know Man of Steel and BVS are like some of his best movies, and David S. Goyer is a hell of a writer. And also Nolan was involved in Man of Steel before I don't, he wasn't as involved in BVS though, but like even having Nolan involved was a really big plus, you know.
Yeah.
Because even he understands sometimes you got to pull back, except for when it's his own movie, then he'll go crazy. But you know how it is.
Yeah, you need like an outside source. You needed a person on the outside looking in to be like, hey, did you think about maybe this won't work? Or what can we do to move this a lot faster or even like hold back and move this a little bit slower to kind of help it digest a little bit more. I mean, I don't hate the movie at all. I think it's entertaining. I don't know if I don't think I was bored at all through part two. I was just
Mhm.
more like, this is going on a while, and I feel like it should be concluding. But then when
Mhm.
I check the time, it's like, oh, there's like 10 minutes involved and there's still battle going on. So I'm like, yeah, I don't think this is going to conclude anytime soon. All
Mhm.
right. So I guess I just went into it thinking that one and two were just going to, I guess part two was going to conclude a lot of the stuff that we had been setting up from the first part. As we know, the second part ends with an open ending. So now there's room for another story. And he has mentioned this already that you said that he wants to create this big universe because I feel like he hasn't. Hopefully, he's able, in a way, I'm hoping he's able to do that with this to get it out of his system because he never got to do it with, the DCEU. He never got to finish that.
Keep thinking like if he did another comic book movie, that'd be pretty sick. But then again, he definitely wouldn't want to work with like Warner Brothers again. He definitely couldn't work with Disney. So
Mm-hmm.
it kind of that knocks out DC and Marvel. So I have no idea who he would do. I
He could
mean,
still
maybe
do. He could probably do something like a little lesser known. I was just thinking of something earlier too that I would like to see Snyder direct. I mean, we were thinking, I think he would do very well with directing maybe like some kind of live action anime, just
that's
like from a
true.
visual standpoint. Obviously, he'd have to get like somebody who's more versed in storytelling of anime, but that could be a really good thing because that would mean he doesn't know very much about this, medium that we know of.
Hmm.
So he would have to get somebody
To
who
do it.
does know
Yeah,
to collaborate on it, and then I think that would make something really good.
get Robert Rodriguez to do it. That man had killed it with Alita Battle Angel. That was a good movie. That's an
Yeah.
anime. There's that interview. It's like the filmmaking tips and tricks, and that Steiner did. I thought it was really funny because I think there's a section where he talks about slow mo, right? In that one, I think it
Mhm.
was in that one, and he mentioned how he likes it because it lets you take it all in and linger on every image and stuff like that. You know, which is true. A lot of the images look cool, but when watching Rebel Moon Part Two, everything was in slow mo from like from like doing the wheat to like them like chopping up stuff and bundling. I'm like, okay, but not everything needs to be in slow mo. And it's like in my video I said, just like there's so much of it that I feel like he got crazy with it, and by the end, you're kind of like, I don't really care much anymore. Because when it's supposed to hit, okay. So I'm working on my 300 video, and it's one of Snyder's like best movies. And in that movie, he uses slow mo, but he only ever uses it at like very precise moments. He uses it a lot still, but like when big decisions are made or when like big reveals happen. Like I think the very first usage of it is when the Persian messengers are coming, and then so it's like a big dramatic thing.
Mhm.
And then when Leonidas kicks him down the well, that's also in slow mo. But leading up to it, Leonidas is looking at all his people. He's in slow mo, and then he looks at his wife, and she gives him the go ahead. Then it goes back to full speed when he's about to kick him down the well. It's just like he uses it to highlight important moments. But in Rebel Moon, he uses so much. You're kind of like, is every moment an important moment now? Because you're using it for every single explosion, every single blast,
Mhm.
and it just makes me go like, it's getting a little out of hand now. Where compared to his old movies, where he did it a lot, but it's never been this much. Like
Mhm.
I think Man of Steel and BBS had like next to none. It's like very little. I think BBS had more than Man of Steel, but like still, like it was only for like the death scene of the Waynes, completely in slow mo. Fantastic scene. Like when characters die and stuff like that, or when big reveals happen, it's in slow mo. I feel like it shouldn't have been that much in slow mo.
Now that I think about it, I think a lot of the slow mo in like the early movies definitely had to do with how fast characters are moving. Like especially in like the in Man of Steel or Batman vs Superman or even Watchmen, a lot of those times when it is slow mo, it's because these characters are moving so fast that if you were to just do it at a normal speed, you're gonna miss a lot of what's happening. So, what did you think of Junkie XL's score of Rebel Moon?
It wasn't as good as part one. Part one was better. I think this one though, I kind of I don't know what I kind of tuned it out. Like I couldn't explain it. Like part one, it went from somber and it felt very epic at times. But in part two, I'm kind of like I think because so much shit was going on, you had all the slow mo, all the explosions, that like the music just kind of got drowned out. At least to me personally, I heard it for a couple scenes, but like
Mhm.
it's just not part. It wasn't nearly as memorable as like part one. And he's usually really good. He's always solid. But like, yeah, in my review, I didn't even mention the music because I completely forgot about it. There's no like score or track that was like really good. Maybe the intro when when Admiral's like Noble, that's his name. When Noble is like brought back to life, the music like erupts and the title screen comes on. Like that was really good. But then I don't remember any track afterwards.
I do remember one because it reminded me of Man of Steel a lot. It when and they're kind of like mirror each other because the it reminded me of the battle scene in Smallville in Man of Steel, and it was during the like when the ships are first starting to come in on the farm
Oh
planet.
yeah,
It definitely reminded me of like, oh, that sounds like Man of Steel. I like that.
I do remember that. That was pretty sick. I thought that was done in this. That was probably done intentionally.
Maybe, but yeah, I just remember thinking like, oh, I kind of like this. Makes me want to watch Man of Steel now.
Man of Steel is awesome. But back to Old Moon because we got off track. Back to Old Moon. I think like I said, I don't think it's as terrible as people say because I think if you look at like the average review, it's getting like a 4, maybe a 5. And I'm like, unfortunately, I can't argue. I'm like, yeah, I would probably give it a 5 at best, 4 if I'm like being angry that day. But like, it's clearly not his best work. Part
Overall,
two,
or just like part two?
part two,
Mhm. Are we
part one.
averaging things like? Would you average the two to make it one complete thing, or would you just like do one? Part one is this. Part two is this.
I would do it like that, just because I don't want to bring the rating down for part one. But no, I would do it just like that, just because like I get that it was kind of like sliced into two movies, but like they still feel like one they're released as two movies, so might as well just rate them separately. But also they just feel like kind of like two different movies, just because the first one had the recruiting, Magnificent Seven stuff, and seven that really fun world building and everything that was interesting. The second one just feels like a completely different thing because it's
Mhm.
supposed to be the end of the first movie, so that's why it just feels very different.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Like
I
same. It
would.
does feel like two different stories, even though they're supposed to be one. We're talking a lot of negative, but
Mhm.
overall, I think, like I said, overall, I enjoyed it. I don't hate it.
Yeah.
Um, it's definitely on the weaker side of Snyder stuff, but it's not something that if it did get a physical release, I'm buying it. Like on
Oh,
4K, no doubt, I'm buying it.
it sucks that these probably won't get physical releases, which kind of sucks. But yeah, I mean, I don't like it's just things where it's like I don't hate it. Like I'm seeing these videos pop up on my feed, like they're saying like it's the worst movie of all time and stuff like that. I'm like, it's not nearly that bad.
Here's the thing: like being someone who went to film school, being someone
Mm-hmm.
who writes a lot of stuff, writes a lot of stories and everything. I can take a look at something and be like, okay, yeah, I know what you're going for, and I respect it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are things that you can tell weren't made with any kind of passion or anything like that. And then those are the items, like those are the properties that I think you can get on all over you want because it wasn't made with any kind of passion or anything other than we need to get this out or it's just a paycheck to me. I haven't seen any reviews on it because one, I stay away from every
Mm-hmm.
single review of any Zack Snyder movie because there's just always going to be people who blindly hate something because they hate Zack Snyder.
Yeah.
And then there are people who aren't fans who don't get it.
Right.
Like they just don't get it. But then there are fans who will just praise anything he does. Whoever I watch a review of, it's going to be one of those three people.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't trust anything that any of those three people have to say.
Well, fair enough. I think the only reason I looked at the reviews is because like after I watched it, I think I mentioned in the video too. It's like I needed to know. It's like I'm
Mhm.
curious because I to me as a fan, I'm like I felt underwhelmed and like dissatisfied. So I'm kind of like I'm curious what the general populace thinks. That's why I saw a lot of people just hate it. But I said, and you're saying some people will just not like it anyway, just because it is Zack Snyder.
Yeah.
After I finished it, I'm kind of like this didn't have any of the cool ideas from the last one. It didn't expand upon nearly anything set up, and it felt really drawn out. And it should have been the ending of the last movie, but now
Yeah.
it's a 2 hour version of the ending that we should have got for the last movie. So I just knew it wasn't going to do well anyway, just because if the first one was like mixed, which a lot of like audience people give it
Yeah.
like a 50 or 60 or something like that, I'm like, I knew this one wasn't going to go over well.
Yeah. I feel like if it had concluded or if it had kind of more of the world building and space, because I've seen different interviews that he's done, and he already has like all this different lore and all these different like backstories of everything and history of stuff. But we never get to see any of that.
It's so frustrating.
So
That's what I'm saying.
it is very frustrating because here I am listening to him be like, yeah, this is what this means, and the lore behind the princess and why the fact that she's not really dead because she's more of like a mythical thing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's also like parallels between her and Korra and the fact that maybe Korra's the actual like princess or whatever, you know what I mean? So there's just all these, like I said, there's all these ideas, and we're like, where is it? Where are they?
Where are they? Where are they?
It's in the sequels that might come out. I don't. Here's the real question. Do you think Netflix will let him do a part 3 to conclude at least this arc of the story with the princess and everything? Do you think they'll let him do another movie in this universe?
I would hope so. That way we don't get another failed like series where things don't get concluded, because we all know that Zack Snyder's Justice League set up all this cool shit that we're never going to be able to see.
It set up a lot. It did.
Yeah, and we're never going to see it. You know, that's just, it is what it is. You know, that's just how the chips fall. But at least with this one, that, you know, we've stated before in one of our episodes when we were talking about it, is that Netflix is putting a lot of backing behind this. They have, you know, like toys and clothing, like there's just so much merch for it that I feel like even with the negative, I don't know, I guess it just depends on, I feel like it just depends on how much overwhelmingly negative the reviews and everything will be for for part 2, that will determine whether they'll be like, do we want to continue with this? Or maybe they're just like so already invested into it financially, obviously, because Netflix doesn't care. They're not passionate about anything. They just care about, is this going to make money? But that's every studio is like that. That's nothing new. Every studio is all about, can we make a return on this? Can we justify spending millions of dollars on something like this? So hopefully, I feel like they might, just because I feel like they've already been so invested into it.
But I hope, like I think we talked, like we just said, I hope Snyder takes like maybe a year to sit back, reflect, and like just brainstorm to like actually get to a concise conclusion with the third film, and just talk to more people to get some ideas of like what could actually work and what went wrong with the first two. Of course, we still got the director's cuts coming out in like probably 2 months probably. He says
Mhm.
like by the end of the summer, so probably another 3 months probably. We'll see how those fare up. I think they're going to be better. Like I know that the part one is definitely going to elevate part one because part one is I think is better. So the director's cut of that's definitely probably going to be really good. It's just part two is what I'm concerned with because now I'm feeling like if he does the director's cut for part two and it's 45 minutes longer, is it now going to feel like even more just super drawn out?
Yeah, it's like where are those 45 minutes going? More
More,
farming, more.
yeah, exactly. Because like if you really think about it, it was just farming, training, planning, and a little bit of character moments that were montaged through. So I guess maybe more of that, or
Mhm.
maybe it's just more action scenes. I do know that they're definitely gonna because a lot of the action. That's what I hate about these PG-13 cuts. A lot of the action is cut weird, like super early, or there's no blood, and so it kind of looks funny.
Especially when you know a director has like certain cuts or whatever, or there's like an R-rated version of
Mm.
whatever you're watching coming out, which I hopefully doesn't hurt it. But yeah, when watching part one, I noticed I was like, I'm pretty sure there was blood there. There's definitely like someone getting shot in the face right there, but they
Mm.
can't show it. There was even a part where um in part he mentioned in the interview that I watched in part one when they killed that guy, the squid face guy, there was a part in there that they made him cut out, was that when he gets stabbed, um the oxygen comes out of his like out of him but as smoke.
That's kind of cool. And they cut that
And
out.
they cut that out because they said Netflix is or whatever, they're like, yeah, you can't show any kind of like smoking in a PG-13 movie. And I was like, okay, so I guess that's gonna be in there. And yeah, even in part two, there are some moments where I'm like, there should have been blood in that one, or it did cut away really fast. Where I'm like, there's probably a lot more violence in that part, or at least in this right here. In a weird, like, kind of morbid sense, more blood and more violence definitely tends to keep people's attention a lot more.
Yeah. Especially if it's done well, because like the trench scene where Noble walks through, you can tell like there's supposed to be blood when he's stabbing these guys, but like the way they're like either cuts too early or the way he stabs them, you're like, there's no blood on it. There's like I think there's no blood even on his knife when he like pulls it out of
Mm-hmm.
someone. I'm like, so it just looks a little weird too. So why the fuck does Snyder agree to do these two cuts? And I don't want there's no excuse I've heard to make the situation make sense. And I've watched the Joe Rogan podcast where Snyder explains it, but like even the way he explains it, I'm like, that doesn't make sense because like I say, it's not getting theatrical, it's not getting worldwide theatrical release. They're not planning on making box office money. They're not doing that. So you don't need the PG-13 or R rating. You don't gotta worry about that.
Mm-hmm.
They're it's going straight to streaming. So there's no reason for it to be PG-13. And then they cut it down to 2 hours instead of like the three that it was, which again doesn't make any sense because you don't have a limited runtime because you're not in a theater, and also being rated R, their top shows are either like TV 14 or higher. Their most streamed movies are rated R. Extraction
Mm-hmm.
1 and 2 are rated R. Six Underground is rated R, and they're the highest streamed movies they've ever released. And so it's some kind of like it feels weird that like for Snyder specifically, they want to be like, yeah, we'll do your rated R version, but do our PG-13 version first. And that's I'm kind of like, if you're gonna greenlight the longer uncut version, just release the longer uncut version. Like you're gonna release it anyway, so this isn't a DVD either, so it's even weirder. I think, like I said, I think they wanted to do their own Snyder Cut double release thing. That's what it is. They wanted to do that with Snyder specifically, and I think that was probably the only way they would get that they would actually make the movie. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the only reason why they funded it in the first place because they knew Snyder has a strong fan base, and they basically started working there right when the release of Snyder Cut started coming out because he did Army of the Dead at the same time he was working on the Snyder Cut, so he had so much hype around him. I think that was around the time he agreed to do Rebel Moon. So I
Yeah.
think that's
And
why
an Army
they
of the
want
Dead
to do
was
that.
bloody as hell too.
That's it. Army of the Dead was rated R. So like, what's it does that was 2.5 hours. It was rated R. So I'm kind of like they wanted to capitalize on the Snyder Cut thing, but I think it backfired because like even fans are like, I'm not watching this until I see the director's cut because I don't want to watch a nerfed version of the movie.
Yeah. And as we all know his work, the director's cut is probably going to be a lot better.
There's no director's cut that he's released that wasn't far superior than the original.
What did you think of the characters, and like who ended up being your favorite character?
My favorite character was General Titus. Well, at first I love the actor who plays him. He's awesome. So he was always my favorite. Then also I thought like his backstory just it seemed way more interesting to me. You know, the disgraced general who got his entire battalion killed, who's now just down on his luck. It's very simple. And so of course obviously his big arc is just being the leader that we all know he is. So in part 2, I liked him because he actually stepped up and was doing stuff. I think maybe Cora was my second favorite. Was she the second favorite? But like that's kind of like default, just because she gets the most amount of attention and we learn the most about her, so we're mostly attached to her. I like General Titus more just because I found him way more interesting, way more proactive, and I just found his backstory to be just a bit more interesting. But unfortunately, I think every other character though just kind of they stay pretty stagnant. Like they're all interesting, but you don't learn as much as you want to learn about them. They're not like in part 2. Like I think I mentioned this too in my video. In part 2, only like General Titus and Gunner get more of a spotlight, whereas everybody else gets like flashbacks and they get their own little cool battle sequence. But that's really about it. So you're kind of left going, yeah, it's cool that they did that, but like it's cool they have their moments. But you're kind of like, I don't know them as much as I want to. Like they don't do as much as I want them to do.
Yeah, that's how I felt with like my favorite character, because I think he's most interesting was Nemesis, because I just think she looks fucking cool as hell. Like she chopped off her own arms. She has like any kind of character with like cybernetic anything. I'm like, I like that guy or girl, whoever it is.
Her blood powers like the blades. Like her backstory seems sick.
It's like cool. A crazy like anime type of like thing. Her whole section for the first part and why she wants to join this fight and stuff like that. I thought they were going to expand more on that. They do kind of a bit in part 2, but like I was texting you when that happened, when she goes out protecting the kids, it did feel very, very lackluster. We're going to use that word a lot.
Anticlimactic.
It felt very anticlimactic to me. I was like, damn, like I feel like in a way I kind of knew a lot of these characters were going to die, or at least a few of them, because in these types of movies, whether it be Seven Samurai or Magnificent Seven, like a lot of these guys are going to go out, maybe all of them, you know what I mean? I just like when they go out, when my favorite character goes out in a blaze of glory or a lot cooler.
Yeah.
I personally felt like Nemesis didn't go out as cool as I wanted it to be. It could have been a lot cooler. Yeah, it's like it could have been a lot cooler, but all right, whatever. I feel like we got a little bit catfished with Ray Fisher. I definitely thought he should have been in part 2.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know he was just gonna get killed. I was just like, damn, all right. So that was probably like one of the only downsides to me in part 1. Yeah, and so like when characters start to die, you kind of don't feel as much because we don't spend, although we do spend what seems to be a lot of time because of the runtime. When you break it down, like you said, like Titus, Gunner, and Cora are pretty much like the only 3 that really get a whole lot of spotlight. Literally, when I was watching it, I said, like, where's that one person? The non-binary character. I was like, where are they at? Like, I haven't seen them at all.
Non-binary character? Which was that?
The one with the short hair.
Oh, they're non-binary? When was that ever? Was that a thing? I didn't know
that's a thing. That's a thing, apparently. When asking Zack Snyder questions, that was one of the things that came up, and he said, "Oh yeah, that it wasn't supposed to be like a huge thing, but it is, part of the story. That's part of that character."
It's probably in the director's cut somewhere. I'm telling you.
Maybe, yeah. Because I was just like, "Oh, okay." I mean, I didn't really care, but
okay. Oh, you're right. Now, they did disappear like for a while, didn't they?
Yeah, and I was like, "Well, where the fuck are they?"
And then they had their scene when they were sneaking around, and that was actually kind of cool.
I was like, did they die? And I just like didn't see it, like, So
and that one guy, Torok, is that his name?
Yeah, the Prince guy.
Yeah, same deal. He only had like two moments where him and Titus like storm out. He did have a pretty cool line though. It's like, save the dime for your enemy. That was kind of cool. But like,
same. Like, here's Titus. He's out there doing his thing. And then Korra and Gunnar are up on the ship doing whatever they got to do. So I'm just like, where is everyone else? Like all these people are dying. Where is everyone else?
By the way, so many people died. I'm like, how many people are in this farm village, and how many people did they bring on that fucking ship? Because damn,
For real, like, because it shows like them blowing up the ships that are dropping them. And then when more people start coming out of the the more mechs start coming out, and then more soldiers coming out of the dust. I'm like, where are they coming from? I haven't seen any drop ships.
I think in the scene earlier, he mentioned about like a team sneaking around, and he mentioned mechs. So I'm assuming that the people dropped with the mechs were just kind of walking there, waiting. I guess I have no idea.
Yeah, because there was that one like troop or whatever that went around the other side. So I guess maybe they were like probably a click or two away, just kind of like
just waiting.
Yeah, just waiting. I really do like. I guess just the on ground farm stuff is where it's like kind of lackluster, because when they're up on the ship, when Korra and Gunnar are up on the ship doing their thing, I found that interesting. I was like, okay, cool. Better, yeah. Now it feels more like a space thing. Feels more sci-fi.
Those sections are. That's why I think they're probably the best sections out of part 1 and part 2. Like when she's going around the ship and she has that hallway fight scene, which is pretty cool. It's gonna look better when it's actually uncut. So
yeah,
and then and then she's fighting Noble, and like they keep falling down, and the ship is tilting. Like all that was just really awesome. Like I liked all that. That was kind of.
I want to see. I'm pretty sure it's in there, but I want to see Noble's head just like come off the shoulders.
Oh yeah,
I like that part was cool. That part was sick though. I remember watching that. I was like, oh damn. That if there's like an extended part where they show his head just rolling, that'd be so sick.
They definitely gotta be. Just with the way that like it kind of crops a little bit, it kind of like cuts in as she like swings. So I'm like, it's probably doesn't do that in the actual version. But yeah, Noble was actually surprisingly Noble was one of my favorite characters, because I like characters that just like people think he's hamming it up, and that's why I like him so much. I think he seems like fun, like Homelander a little bit, where like
he's kind of delusional in some points.
Yes, he's very delusional, prideful. He's delusional. Like I like that. Where it's like he's clearly, it's like he's not the good guy. He's not a good guy, obviously, but he is very him on screen is just entertaining. His introduction scene in part 1 I thought was really good. I mean, it kind of copied Inglourious Basterds a little bit, but it's still pretty good. I like the scene too when he gets blasted, right? This is the way he walks. I liked it. Where he gets blasted, he stands up, brushes himself off, and he takes a breath and steps down into the trench.
Yeah,
he's just like goes right down. And he just starts murking everyone on the way out. I'm like, that was awesome.
One really cool detail. I feel like they should have utilized more of the blades. I really like the part where Korra, she's fighting the guy and it drops, and she grabs it and it actually burns her. And if you notice, and she had to wrap it up, because if you notice, everybody who wields those things is wearing some kind of glove. Or with Nemesis, the only way she can wield those blades is because her arms are literally mechs. You know what I mean? And so they're protecting her arms, which is why I guess she had to cut off her hands, because she wouldn't be able to use them otherwise.
Did you notice that Nemesis are the only ones that are red, aren't they?
Nemesis is red.
Blue. You're right. Hers is all red, so I guess it's also. And doesn't her blood power those or something? Like I said, she sounds so cool, and her glimpses in her backstory are cool. But yet, it's like you're underwhelmed. You're kind of like, dang,
they're not.
Now she's.
But in a lot of ways, I feel like that's just common in a lot of movies. Think of every single movie you've seen where there's like a really cool character, whether it's like the silent character that never talks or anything like that. They're almost always underutilized, and they're always like, damn, that guy was so cool. I wish he would have done more, or I wish she would have done more, but it never really pans out that way.
But yeah, I just so I guess Rebel Moon Part 2, not his worst, but definitely not even close to his best. Not as terrible as people make it out to be, but it's really definitely not as good as the first one. I don't think. That's where I stand. How about you? Where do you stand?
After watching Part 1, I had high hopes that Part 2 was going to be better. But I was definitely a little bit disappointed. I still enjoyed it. I wasn't bored at all. It did, it did drag a lot, even though we said it was shorter, right? Or was it longer than the first one?
It was shorter.
Shorter than the first. It still felt longer than Part 1.
But yeah, it's because the first half isn't as interesting as the second half.
It definitely has its moments. I feel like Part 2 definitely has its moments where it does have enough to keep me invested and keep me entertained. But as a whole, Part 1 and Part 2 definitely weaker of Part 2, and definitely leaves you wanting more. Don't know if that's a good or a bad thing.
I guess it's like it leaves you wanting more in the sense of like you don't want to see more of the story. You want to see more of this story that was supposed to get told.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
you're like it didn't end. It didn't end the way anyone
it
thought it was going
wasn't
to.
satisfying.
Wasn't satisfying. Yeah, because like I was with you. I thought they would defend the farm within the first like 45 minutes maybe, but then the rest of the movie because I knew it was 2 hours long. I figured the rest of the movie would be something else entirely to wrap up the whole story. But it didn't do that. It was like half it was setting up for the final battle for the farm, and then the half was the battle for the farm. So it's like it felt like okay, I thought it was just going to be more to it than just fighting this one location
Mhm.
that isn't as interesting as anything we saw in the previous movie.
Yeah, because the way the first one sets up is the recruiting stage for the defense of the farm, but then they get
Mhm.
betrayed by Charlie Hunnam's character,
Right.
which I thought was very interesting. And obviously, and I think in the extended cut, you'll see his brains get blown out because
Oh
that
yeah.
part also kind of cuts away. But that part is all cool because you're thinking like, all right, cool. Now these guys are getting set back, and then now they're gonna fight for a bit, and then afterwards when they kill Noble, you're like, okay, now this is gonna spark something. They're really into it now. They're really getting on the bad side of the mother world from all of this that they're doing. Very interesting setup. So I figured, oh, okay, cool. That the first one ends in that kind of sense. Like, all right, well, cool. Now we're back. Now we got to go back here and train because they're not going to take this lying down. Like, they're pretty
Mhm.
pissed off. So they're going to send everything they can at us right now. So, yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Part two, maybe halfway through, that's like, training and all that stuff and just getting ready for the storm that's about to come down on them. And then wrap everything up with like the king or whatever, or the usurper king, because they still have yet to even meet him or
That's
have
true.
any kind of interaction with him at all.
Yeah, there's so much more we like I said, there's so much more we didn't even touch on that's like shown in the previous movies. There's so much that we don't even know
Mhm.
or didn't even see. So that's why it
And now,
feels
yeah,
strange.
and now with part two showing us that the princess is more of like an ethereal being in a sense, because when Korra shoots her, there's this like
Like a light.
magical
Yeah.
wisps and stuff. So when that happens, I'm thinking like, is she really dead? So at the end, when it's like, oh, princess isn't dead, I was like, okay, I kind of saw that coming.
Yeah, a little bit. I was
But
like,
then
okay,
I'm like,
she's
well, okay, well, then that just means there's just so much more that's going to be happening. But what about this? Like, I don't know. I kind of feel like we're not catfished because at some points I'm like, cool. Now, if this movie would have been what we wanted it, I think we all would have been like, oh, awesome. There's more. There's more to
hmm
this. But because we're so kind of let down in a sense, now that there's more, you're like, shit, there's more.
I saw someone make a comment. I don't know if it was my video or someone's video, but someone said like instead of making these 2 4 hour, like a 4 hour movie, instead of doing like a 4 hour movie and they split it in half, they said realistically they could just cut down. They could have cut down part two and put as the climax of of the last movie, and just make the last movie a 3 hour movie.
Mhm.
Because with the way it kind of flows, if you kind of watch them back to back, it's supposed to be just one movie. It feels like it was supposed to be just one movie that was put into two, just because the way it's structured is so strange. It just feels like this should have been the conclusion of the previous movie, or like how you said, Kill and Noble should have sparked something bigger, but that didn't happen either. So it's so like annoying. Where like I was with you. I was thinking, okay, they're gonna kill Noble, but now that he's back, he's coming with everything now. So they're instead of defending the farm, they're going to go get more help, maybe from the rebels or whatever, right? But
Mhm.
that just doesn't happen. Like I was thinking when I was with you, I'm like, okay, now that they killed Noble, they probably up and they realize they shouldn't have done that, and things are going to get worse now. But no, it really is just like they kill Noble, he comes back, and they go back to the original smaller conflict on the less interesting farm planet that they
Yeah.
started on. So you're kind of like, okay, so this is just the ending of the initial conflict that we thought it was going to be. So this is how the first movie should have ended, if anything. Like I think someone said that they were to like do like a 3 hour version of these two movies. It probably could have worked because if they could cut out a lot of the stuff that drags in part two and just add it on to the 2 hour and 15 minute version that already exists with part one, it could have
Mhm.
just been like a 3.5 hour long movie. That's
Yeah.
it.
Because I think that's why we feel that way, is because it felt like it was setting up for something huge.
Mm-hmm.
When in reality, it's very contained to this one small story.
Yeah, like I said, a little catfish, a little baited because you thought something else was going to happen, but then it doesn't. So you're kind of like, oh, okay. So we're just fighting for the farm. Gotcha. Like, I don't hate it. It's like I think it's just because I guess just because we're a Snyder fan, we can appreciate him just going out and having fun.
Mhm.
I can appreciate that aspect of it, but in the day, it's kind of like I would rather watch part one again, and that one, didn't even have a. That one actually did have a final conclusion. If you just ended like 5 minutes early, you don't see Noble come back, and that's the end of the movie. And it's like just the world doesn't get explored as much as you want to. Only a couple characters get moved up, and a lot of the ones you want to get more screen time don't get it. It just feels, yeah, it just feels underwhelming. You're just like
Yeah.
watching it. It's not boring. It's weird because like I thought the movie flew by. It's only an hour and like 50 minutes. So when watching it, I'm like, yeah, things are just moving along. Before you know it, though, you're at like 50-minute mark, and you're like, we still haven't had the final battle yet. When's that happening?
Well, another character that we didn't really talk about was Jimmy, the robot.
Mhm.
I think he was pretty cool too. Obviously, they're not going to be able to do so much with him because he is just a robot.
Right.
But I do feel like we could have got a little bit more of him like by himself, or maybe even like an inner monologue, because he does narrate the story. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was actually going through some trailer footage because I was editing the video. There in the trailer, there are a few Jimmy scenes that weren't in part one or part two. So there probably are scenes where he is actually just by himself, like observing them and probably just
Mhm.
contemplating stuff. Because he does like just join the battle, like kind of like out of nowhere. Because I think
Yeah,
he has
I
one
wanted more.
conversation.
Yeah, I wanted more of like him deciding that. Like he does talk with Cora, and she's like, "Hey, you're gonna, get in this or what?" And he's just kind of like back and forth, like, "I don't really know. This isn't really my fight." You know what I mean? But
Hmm.
there's never really like any deciding moment. There's always a deciding moment. Like
Hmm.
Jimmy, he just literally just shows up out of nowhere, and you're
Oh,
like, okay. Like, I kind of wanted to see more of like an inner thought or whatever, because he is an intellectual. Obviously, he's in artificial intelligence. So it's not like he's just a robot. He has thoughts and feelings. So I kind of wanted to see that moment where it triggers and is like, okay, yeah, I got to do something.
although I do like his fight sequence was pretty cool. I
Yeah.
like when he blew up the mech and the way he lands. He has like his own little cape flapping. He looked I'm like, is that like a Superman landing? It looks like I see Henry Cavill just doing that, just landing like
Yeah,
that.
that was pretty
And,
cool.
and after seeing the Jimmy robots like in action, it kind of makes sense now why the mother world took over so much because those things are fucking crazy. Because he took out everything by himself.
Pretty much.
Imagine an army of those guys. So it makes sense of how the Empire got so freaking huge.
So to wrap it up, do you feel like Rebel Moon would have benefited more as a series rather than movies?
Oh yeah, easily because of especially how long we know it's gonna be. Like if this was like a 6 episode like miniseries or something like that, they could have easily done like the Magnificent Seven thing where they meet different characters, and then each episode could have been like a little backstory drop as they help the characters out with a quest or something like that. Because that's
Hmm.
essentially what they do. They meet someone, they do a favor for them, and then they recruit them. That's kind of how the first movie went for a while. So if they did that in the show, it would have been even better, like a miniseries format. I'm really surprised Netflix didn't want to do that, considering how long it already was.
Yeah, because we're at what, like 4 hours right now, with another added 45 minutes to each one. So that'll average out to almost 6 hours. Like
Yeah, it's already
45-minute episodes. You could have had 6 or 7 episodes. Like,
yeah, exactly. First one should have been set. You could do like an extended first episode where the first episode could have been everything up until where they meet Charlie Hunnam's character Kai. It could have been everything up to that because that all happens within the first like 45 minutes. You can go like to an hour when they recruit the first guy, and then that could have been the first episode. And after that, you could just done 45-minute episodes. After that, you could have
mhm.
had 5, 6 episodes. So
Yeah,
you
and then
have
like expand on that.
Yeah, I thought maybe it's also probably a budget thing too. I imagine too, because the budget for a show is different for a budget for a movie. So that's I guess like how they would space it out would have been like only certain episodes will get a certain amount of money, so you get to film a certain way. So that's probably why they probably didn't do that.
So in conclusion, overall pretty entertaining, but just not satisfying.
Yep, I agree. That's it. Entertaining, not satisfying.
Where do you think this will kind of land in like the ether of Zack Snyder's projects? You think it'll be something that people remember, or something that like, because I don't think bad publicity really factors in when it comes to Snyder movies because they've all had some kind of bad publicity, yet we're still talking about them.
Yeah.
You yourself, you yourself get Snyder hate comments in videos that don't even have anything to do
To this day,
with Snyder movies.
the Southpaw video, people were talking about Snyder. Southpaw,
Southpaw, and Jake Gyllenhaal.
nothing to do with them. I see what you're saying. Just even though it was very like underwhelming and lackluster, the fact that I think he made I think the fact that he made it is the reason why people will continue to talk about it, either negative or positive. It could be seen as like what happens if you give a director complete freedom. Here's an example of what could happen, like that, you know?
Yeah.
Or what happens if you what happens if a director does this and that? You know, like I think he'll be these movies will be seen as an example from Army of Dead to Rebel Moon 1 and 2. Like this little era will be seen as like I don't know the creative freedom,
the full
era.
Snyder era.
Yeah, exactly.
They'll probably use that in like Tropic Thunder too. Like you never go full Snyder.
you never go full Snyder. But although I do feel like some people will use this as an excuse to be like, see, Snyder was never good because when he's left to his own devices, he makes pretty mediocre movies. If he has better writers or more people to bounce ideas off of, he clearly excels because when he's good, he's so good. That's the issue. When he's good, he's so good, but it's like his own devices. Yeah, he just kind of he goes crazy. I think we're gonna remember it for a while for good and bad.
All right, Tex, this was fun. We definitely got a lot more topics to discuss, but for today, we just kept it to Rebel Moon because we knew we were gonna have a lot to talk about. It's definitely something that we've both been waiting for a long time, and then now that it's here, we finally get to actually like talk about everything that we wanted to, rather than just speculation with all the other videos that we did back then. It was all just speculation and what we wanted, and then now we get to talk about like what it is. So many good points, but it's on an even level of like there's an even amount of bad points. So in that sense, I feel like the movies overall, part 1 and part 2, just end up being, well, at least part 2 for the most part just ended up being pretty mid. Yeah. Whereas like the first one sets up a lot, and then part 2 kind of just fumbles it a bit.
Rebel mid, I guess.
Rebel mid.
Unfortunately.